What is up, guys? Welcome to episode 5. No, wrong episode number. Episode 3 of Swim's Hot Takes. Well, we're going to be doing 5 different cards in this episode. Okay, so this is Spells Edition, whatever the heck that means. I don't know why I'm just categorizing them in random ass ways. I have no idea, but we're going to break down the 5 spells that I think are a lot better than people are giving them credit for, basically. And some of these, you know, you might have seen a lot of, and others maybe not so much. In no particular order, let's go ahead and check out Brother's Bond. So Brother's Bond is a very powerful aggressive spell. Look at this. Give 2 allies 2 attack and nothing else for 2 mana at burst speed. So this is a pretty insane spell. Obviously for aggro decks, this is just nuts value. The permanent buff on 2 different units. You know, you can use it when, you know, your opponent has declared blockers on things that didn't get blocked. The prime target would be elusives. You know, when you use this on elusive allies, it is pretty nutty value, and there's a lot of kind of like combo slash aggro slash OTK decks that can benefit from this card. It's just so cheap for what it does. Not too much more else to say about this. A pretty amazing and underrated card. And speaking of aggressive potential, a card you probably saw a lot of, or at least some of if you watched footage of this game or played some of yourself, is Rush. I'm going to put Rush on this list because even though you probably did see this card being played around, I think this is very, very powerful. It's an incredibly solid combat trick. This is kind of maybe the best combat trick that there is. Just the ability to have 1 attack and quick attack is just amazing for 1 mana. There's so much this card can do. It kind of belongs in basically every Ionian aggro list. And yeah, it's probably ahead of all the other combat tricks that are in this game, at least off the top of my head. In terms of the cheap 1 mana, like flexible ones, there's some that, you know, Transfusion is very good, but you can only use it in fairly specific circumstances. All right, next up we have a pretty interesting card that I've actually never seen been played once, but on Garde. This is a pretty powerful card, I believe. It's fairly circumstantial, and it's the kind of card that in another style of game you would kind of like look over, right? Like if we come from other card games, there's probably not too much to see here. It's 3 mana, so that's pretty expensive for like a cute trick. That's really not going to amount to too much. It's only good when you're on offense, which is only half the turns in the entire game. I don't expect this card to be absolutely amazing, but I'm imagining a lot of situations where its burst speed into the kind of like open attack game pattern will actually be extremely useful, right? So because it has burst speed, really important when you're on the attack token. Basically, you'll be able to use this right before your open attack, right? And when you have challenger, it's going to be really effective when both players are trying to own the board. So effectively, it's going to be best in kind of like a mid-range mirror where you and your opponent are both fighting for the board, and this will kind of immediately win you the board, right? This is a pretty nuts card under those circumstances. Now, where I have to detract points is the fact that Demacia already has some pretty high value challenger effects in, you know, Fiora, Fleet, Feather Tracker, as well as, you know, Silverwing Elite, Lawrence Protege. There's a lot of effective challengers in this region, so it's possible that these decks just won't need this extra source of challenger enough to run this card. But this is still a, you know, potentially competitive level card, and I think this might see some experimentations in some mid-range decks as a bit of a meta call. Next up, we have the Box. The Box is a card that I could definitely be overrated. Oh god, it's not showing up here. That's unfortunate. The Box is a card that I think definitely, it's possible I'm looking at this as a bit stronger than it is, but I see this card as fairly amazing, and I would typically run this over Grasp of the Undying. The ability to deal 30 to each enemy that was summoned this round is a pretty powerful ability that will demand the opponent's respect in a lot of situations. This is not going to be a 3-of card in your decks. At very most, it's going to maximize as something like a 2-of. But if you're playing, you know, pretty intelligently, there's a lot of ways to basically abuse this for value, especially against decks that you expect, you know what they're going to play on which turns. As a random example, example, if you identify that they are a stun recall deck and they're going to be running Yasuo, they're probably going to be playing Yasuo for value on round 4 or 5, depending on the circumstances that they're in. If you can do a little bit of a hand read, it can be pretty important to kind of save mana with your box in hand to be able to kind of counter that on the same turn, right? It's a very, very cool concept for a card where you have to be saving your mana intelligently, and your opponent also has some great counterplay opportunities in terms of, you know, thinking, well, what if they have the box? I need to save my, you know, good engine tool for a situation where, you know, they don't have the 4 mana required to cast the box, right? Another circumstance, of course, is developing multiple units in the same turn. This is going to be something that aggro decks, for example, will do quite a bit. So there's a lot of aggro decks that might try to develop like 3 different units on round 4 before attacking. And if they try to develop a 3rd unit, you get a nuts value box. Even against like 2 units, there's nothing wrong with just smashing down 2 units with this. You're pretty priced in at 4 mana. You know, I mean, just the ability to deal 3 damage for 4 mana isn't even bad. Like, that's totally fine, and there's a lot of cool ways to use this. So again, I see it more as kind of a flexible slot that can get some surprise value. It's not super nuts, but it is going to find homes as like a 1 of or a 2 of in some decks. Really cool concept for a card. This is actually one of my favorite designed cards in the entire game, because it really makes both you and your opponent think quite a bit. Even if you don't have the box, your opponent has to think about it. So Fading Memories is going to be my last card, another cool Shadow Isles card that really makes you think. Fading Memories at 0 mana burst speed, pick a follower, create an ephemeral copy of it in hand. So there's a lot of cool things this can do. First of all, obviously if you're choosing something that's already ephemeral like Shark Chariot, this just becomes a Shark Chariot, which is kind of nice. Not actually super high value, and I don't really like doing that because you typically don't really need multiple Shark Chariots very much. But the idea of being able to choose any follower you want is pretty nice. For example, you can choose an opponent's follower. There's going to be a lot of like interesting scenarios where your opponent will have something you just want to nab with this, and you don't mind, you know, turning it into an ephemeral version of itself to that end, right? There's a lot of situations where you can, you know, use it on something to get value out of, you know, their effects on the ephemeral card. Like, for example, I mean, at a worst case scenario, you can use it on like a hapless aristocrat to create a spider. You can often sacrifice what you just put in your hand with Fading Memories too. Like, if you get, you know, if you basically play that unit, it can give you the sacrifice fodder, even though it's ephemeral. It's a perfectly good sacrifice target for a lot of various effects, the most prudent of which being Cursed Keeper. Because when you use Fading Memories on a Cursed Keeper, and you get an ephemeral Cursed Keeper in hand, it will basically just die at the end of the turn, giving you the 4/4 stat line on your Escaped Abomination. Basically, you're playing a you're playing a 0 mana, sorry, not 0 mana. You're playing a 0 mana that gives you a 2 mana 4/4, right? So you're cheating out a pretty effective like early stat line at the price of having to wait a turn. And one last thing you can do with Fading Memories too, which is also really cool, is you can do a 0 mana pass to your opponent. Now this is going to be something that's very incredibly counterintuitive to you if you played Artifact, because the way passing works is a little different in this game. We all know that in Runeterra, if both players pass simultaneously, consecutively, one after another, you know, we go on to the next round. So if you want to gain reactivity on a certain turn, you kind of have to risk when you pass, right? Because when you're passing to your opponent, if you want to see what they do before you play, you do run the risk of them seeing what you're doing, passing back on you, and locking you out of a play, right? But something you can do in this game is if you play any card, including a burst card, even though burst gives you an action back, if I play this and then take the pass, my opponent will just have the action without the ability for their pass to lock me out, right? So again, that's basically not how initiative cards would work in Artifact. Effectively, the burst speed will give my ability to pass while counting as having played an action that turn. So I'll give you an example. Let's say we're on turn 7. I have the attack token, but I don't want to start by attacking. Maybe their board is wider than mine. I've got, you know, a very powerful card like Ruination in hand. You know, I've got a big Ruination that I want to set up, and I've got enough mana to be able to use it because I've got 2 spell mana in reserve, right? But, you know, I have a bit of a board, and their board is a bit wider than mine, so I can't attack. What I'm thinking is I want to let them play a unit before I Ruination. So I go ahead and use Fading Memories on something at 0 mana, and I pass it back to my opponent. And, you know, maybe they think for a little bit. They're like, okay, I've got this big unit to play, right? Maybe they even think you might have Ruination. But if they pass now, and then you pass, they're locked out of all their mana. You're in control, all right? Think about that. It's very, very important. So even if they think you might have Ruination, they're still like, it's low odds. Let's just play my unit. Let's get a big boy down. And bam, you get a huge value out of Ruination, killing an extra unit and denying, you know, the ability for the opponent to develop back the board after the Ruination by having used the, you know, 0 mana pass to gain reactivity. A very, very, very powerful trick, and there's just so much you can do with Fading Memories. I love this card to death, and at the same time, between Fading Memories and the box, I really like the concept of the cards, and obviously Shadow Isles is a little OP, to be honest. But I don't think either of these cards is necessarily a culprit in that. They're fairly powerful cards that, you know, generate a lot of interesting scenarios. But Fading Memories is far from, like, you know, a hyper auto include and Shadow Isles lists. It can be a little clunky in a lot of, you know, its own ways. But there's just a lot of neat tricks you can do with it. Okay, so that's gonna be episode 3 of my hot takes. These are 5 spell cards that I think you might have seen a little bit of. You might not have seen too much of them. But either way, I think these cards are better than they are probably being represented as. Alright guys, I will see you guys in the next episode.